quizzes. Do we give them at the beginning of class or at the end of class? I was creating my syllabus for this new semester and I texted my friend. I was like, do you give quizzes at the beginning or end of class? And she said end of class. And I was like, that's what I do too. But I know my office mates gives quizzes at the beginning of class. So what is best? I've actually done both, and I'll tell you a little bit about my journey as well as share the pros and cons of quizzing. All right, so let's start with how I started. When I first started teaching, when I was still a graduate student, I would give quizzes at the end of class because my thoughts are, all right, I have lecture still to give, so I want to make sure I time out my lecture appropriately and then give them the exact right amount of time for the quiz. I just assumed that if I gave a quiz at the beginning of class, maybe students may take longer and maybe just sit there staring at the paper, and then I would lose lecture time. So I gave my quizzes at the end at the very beginning, and here are some of the reasons why I decided to change my mind. So these are cons of giving your quiz at the end of class. I noticed that my students were unengaged in my lecture because they were worried about the quiz. So they were spending class time studying for the quiz instead of learning the new material that they will still need to use for next week's quiz and for the test. So I didn't like that my students were not engaged while I was teaching because they were reviewing their notes because they're nervous about the quiz. I also experienced students just coming in the last 15 minutes of class, so skipping the lecture and then just coming to take the quiz. I found that so disrespectful and it was so annoying. I hated that. So I was like, oh no, well, if we do the quiz at the beginning, then at least they'll be there for the whole class. And now I teach math, so this may or may not apply to you, but something that I noticed when I would give quizzes at the end of class is that after my lecture, I would hand out the quiz, and some students would get confused and try to use the day, so the new lecture content that I had just taught that day, they would try to use that information on the quiz. I would never quiz on something I just taught that same day, right? The quiz was on previous information, but they're mixing up the topics. And so I found that maybe they needed a bit of transition time. They really struggled separating those two topics. And so I didn't like that at all. I will share some pros because giving the quiz at the end of class is not all bad. For some reasons I've already stated, I really like giving quizzes at the end of class. So the pro of this is when students finish the quiz early, they can just leave class. They don't have to sit around and wait for the rest of the class to finish in silence or staring at their phone. They can just leave when they're done, which is awesome. And also the students who take a little extra time to get done with the quiz, maybe they really need to think through what they're writing and review and go back and look at their answers, they have a little buffer time, right? There's time between classes, so I can extend maybe about 5, sometimes 10 minutes to let those students have a little extra time to think if they need it. And another pro about having the quiz at the end is you can more effectively plan your lecture because you know exactly what time you're going to stop the lecture, so you can figure out exactly how much you need to cover before it's time to move on to the quiz, instead of kind of the quiz running longer and then you don't get to cover all the things you need to cover, and then you really were like, did I really need to have all that extra time for the quiz because the people who took so long to take the quiz actually didn't get the questions right anyway, so was this a waste of time for everyone? Questions like that. So that was my experience when I gave quizzes at the end of class. So note, this was when I was a beginner. At this point, I've taught over 10 years in college math classes. Then I had taught, 1 to 2 semesters. So I have a little more intuition now about what my students need and what's more helpful for them. But at the very beginning, I was doing the quizzes at the end, and that was my experience.